Hey guys, it's Viejo here, and we are right at the end of the second week of March in 2025. Got a cold, rainy day here on the central coast of California. In fact, we got snow on our local mountaintops. And it's cold out here in the garage today. We've got less than 50 degrees outside. I think it's only about 45 outside. Anyway, hey, you might remember a couple of weeks ago I did an unboxing video. One of my subscribers, T Drage 60 over on the Rumble channel, got a hold of me and he says, "Hey, I've got some 45 Schofield brass. Can you use it?" And he said that he couldn't use it. It wouldn't work in his 45 Colt revolver. So I said, "Heck yeah, man!" So he sent me 2 bags of this really nice, brand new Starline brass. And I told him, "Okay, that's great. You know, I'll use it. In fact, I'll do a little short 45 Schofield loading series for it." And so that's what we're going to do, and that's what today is about. This is just going to be part 1 of probably a 3 or 4 part short series. And you know me, I love a series, right? So we're going to talk about this 45 Schofield cartridge, a little bit about the revolver that it was designed for, and YouTube, before you get too upset, all the revolvers that you see here are BB gun replicas. Okay, they're not real firearms. For one thing, I don't have a Smith & Wesson Model 3. I wish I did, but I don't. Anyway, but I do have a BB gun revolver copy, okay, which is what this is right here. And we've got a single action Army of the same ilk. Okay, it's going to be a BB gun. For demonstration purposes today. So what we'll talk about here in part 1 is this. We're going to talk about the round itself, the 45 Schofield, and where it came from, and a little bit about why Tom couldn't use them in his revolver. Now, there's plenty of video out here on YouTube and Rumble about the 45 Schofield round, and a little bit of the history of it, but we'll kind of give you a little bit of a background here anyway. So this cartridge dates back to the early 1870s, so it's an old one. It was originally black powder, of course, back in those days, as was the Colt Single Action Army. And the Single Action Army revolver was in widespread use throughout the U.S. Army in those days in the 45 Colt caliber. It was a good cartridge, and it was a fine firearm, still a fine firearm today. But Major George Schofield thought he had a better idea. There were some things that he thought were problems with cavalrymen using the Single Action Army. And one of them was that it was time consuming to load and unload. All right. And we're not talking about loading the cartridge, we're talking about putting the cartridges in and out of the firearm itself. And Major Schofield favored the Smith & Wesson Model 3, which came out at about the same time, okay, early 1870s. They only made these for a little while, and then later on they came back and made it again, what they called the new Model 3, which had some differences. But this is a break top revolver, all right? Okay, remember, BB gun, guys, no ammo, no live firearms around. So the revolver would break open like this, and there's an ejection star that would pull all of those rounds out of the cylinder. Okay, and if you snap that fast enough, they'd come flying out of there. All right. So that was a distinct advantage if you're a cavalryman. Let's talk about that for just a second, about why that cartridge was advantageous over the Single Action Army. In order to tell the story, we got to kind of start at the beginnings of the 45 Schofield round, and it begins really with the 45 Colt and the Single Action Army. Okay, this was in widespread use in the United States Army in the early 1870s, and it has remained as a very popular firearm design even till today. I mean, they're just handy. They just worked. It was a very elegant design, and it still is. But there are some issues with it, particularly with cavalry. And it had to do largely with loading and unloading while on horseback. Okay, it was difficult to manage your horse and manage the revolver at the same time. And then to unload the single action Army, okay, we got to come to half cock, open the gate, okay, line up with your ejection rod, and dump your cartridges that way. Line up the next one, and you had to do that, of course, 5 or 6 times, depending on how many rounds that you had loaded. I'm kind of holding my hand off center here so that you can see it. But that's the process there, okay, to unload the single action Army one at a time. And then, of course, your reload, kind of the same thing, back to half cock, okay. Cartridge has got to go in. You can do this, again, taking 2 hands, but more tricky to do it up this way. If you're trying to hold your reins at the same time, you still got to come in here and rotate the cylinder each time. Okay, do this without getting my hands in the way. Well, probably not going to be able to do it so that you can see it. But one at a time, okay, is all you can do. Okay, that's the only, you only got one cylinder exposed at the loading gate at a time. Okay. And Major Schofield saw that loading and reloading as an issue for a mounted cavalryman. Okay, you're on the ground, not quite so much of an issue, but with the brake top Model 3, you could load and unload in about half the time as with the single action Army. All right, enter the Smith & Wesson Model 3, which was available and in production during the same period, early 1870s. Okay, considerably different style. Okay, again, it's a Smith & Wesson, not a Colt. And a big advantage of that top brake is that you open the latch and you could brush the barrel against your leg, and all of those rounds would get ejected, okay, onto the ground if you're horseback. So there's also a distinct advantage in reloading. One is that you could hold the revolver by the barrel at the same time as holding the reins of your horse, okay, and you could load 2 rounds at a time like this, okay. So the Model 3 has a definite advantage to the cavalryman when it comes to loading and unloading, in particular while managing your horse at the same time. So Schofield went to Smith & Wesson and said, hey, I've got this idea for the Model 3, but I need you to make a couple changes for me. And one of them was that he wanted a little bit wider rim, and he wanted the cartridge shorter than the 45 Colt. And he wanted that rim to be a little bit wider so it would that ejection star would grab it a little more positively. And he wanted it shorter so there was less of a throw on the case to get it out of there. All right. So that was a couple of things that he liked about the new cartridge. And the original Model 3, let me bring this up here for you, had the cylinder latch was up here, and it hinged, it was mounted right to the barrel, okay? And you could operate that latch, okay, kind of. If you got to have kind of longer fingers than I have, but it could be done. But what Schofield wanted was a latch that was back here mounted to the frame, okay? And that could be operated with your thumb very easily. Okay, I don't want to let this fall because those are fake BB gun cartridges. You guys they're not real, okay? And the cartridge itself that Major Schofield developed in concert with Smith & Wesson became known as the 45 Schofield round to differentiate it from the 45 Colt. And the revolver that ensued became known as the Schofield revolver. And the 45 Schofield cartridge was based on the 45 Colt cartridge, but there are some differences. Let's take a quick look at the two cartridges compared. I've got a couple of dummy rounds here, one for 45 Schofield and one for the 45 Colt. And since the 45 Colt was actually sort of the parent of the 45 Schofield cartridge, let's take a look at those two sort of side by side. We'll look at these dummy rounds and then measure a couple cases and talk about that a little bit. Here are a couple of dummy rounds loaded with the same bullet. On top there is the 45 Schofield in a Starline case, and just below it is the 45 Colt, and I think that's a Winchester case there. But notice the difference in how much shorter the Schofield case is compared to the Colt case below it. Here's a 45 Colt case. Let's measure that rim diameter. This is a Winchester case, and we're just under 0.5, just under 510. We got 0.508 or so, okay? And then if we try a Schofield rim, we're up at, get the whole picture there, 0.520, okay? So let's see how that plays out in a cylinder. Okay, what we're looking at here is the cylinder out of my Ruger 45 Colt Vaquero, and I've got 6 empty Starline 45 Colt cases in there. Notice no primer. These are all just empty cases, guys, okay? They have been sized. And if we get down here close, you can see that there's a little bit of a gap, okay, between the heads of those cases, so they all fit, okay? Let's check this with some Schofield cases in there. The same cylinder, and again with empty cases, and these are Starline 45 Schofield cases, and look how tightly those guys fit. Okay, those rims are really close. You know, they will spin, okay? They're loose enough in there, but it is a close fit, all right? Just the, you know, most marginal space that you could imagine. And in some revolvers, the cylinders have chambers that are close enough together that the 45 Schofield won't fit. And that was the problem that Tom had with his, and why he decided that he could not use the 45 Schofield case, because the rims were slightly larger. And the story goes that the U.S. cavalrymen could use the shorter Schofield case in their 45 caliber cylinders, but in at least some of their revolvers, you couldn't get a full 6 rounds in there, or 5 if that's what you carried, because the case rims would interfere. You could get 3 of them in there like this, okay? So even though to a certain extent the Schofield cartridge was backwards compatible with the 45 Colt, the reverse was not true, because the 45 Colt case was longer, the whole cartridge was longer, and the round would stick out through the end of the cylinder and it wouldn't rotate. So that was not good. The Schofield revolver then, okay, the variant of the Smith & Wesson Model 3 was designed such the cylinder was a little bit bigger and had a little bit better spacing between the chambers to accommodate the wider rimmed 45 Schofield round. There is a 45 Colt case for comparison's sake. And the 45 Colt case was too long for the Schofield variant cylinder. Okay, the cartridge would extend out through the end of the cylinder and it wouldn't rotate. And if you had the 45 Colt single action Army, the cylinder was longer. It would accommodate, obviously, all of the 45 Colt rounds, but it would also chamber a 45 Schofield. There's the 45 Schofield next to a Colt, okay, for comparison's sake. But these guys would fit in there longitudinally, okay? There was just that issue with the rim thickness. So you could load and shoot 3 of these, maybe more, depending on the actual firearm you had, okay, out of the single action Army. But you couldn't shoot any of the 45 Colt out of the Model 3. Okay, they just weren't going to work. Again, so as far as the Army was concerned, it was too much of a problem. You know, if ammo for the 45 Schofield got delivered to guys that were shooting the single action Army, they could load some of them in there, still make their firearms work, but you might have a 3-shooter instead of a 6-shooter. If the 45 Colt ammo got delivered to guys using the Model 3, they were SOL. They couldn't use it at all. So that was no bueno for the Army. And so the Army decided, yeah, we're going to go with the Colt. And actually later on there was a round developed, M1887, I can't remember the exact designation for that round. It was a little bit shorter than the Colt, and it would work in both revolvers anyway. That's not part of the story today. So Tom had the same issue with his revolver that the U.S. Army was having with their single action armies. They just wouldn't work well with the revolvers they had. So that's why he decided to send this stuff to me. And as you saw in the clip where I brought out the cylinder out of my Vaquero, okay, they work in all of my revolvers. They're close, but they will work. So with the shorter cartridge, a little less powder, okay, so your round is not going to travel, you know, as fast as the longer 45 Colt cartridge would allow, but it was fast enough, and the proof was in the pudding. The round performed well in battle, and being that it was a little bit lighter round, okay, it was a little easier for the guys to manage, but again, still was delivering enough energy downrange to get the job done. So the Army actually liked the idea. Okay, all right, there you go. We're talking about the 45 Schofield round that was descendant of the 45 Colt of the period. Cartridge is a little shorter, the case rim's a little bigger diameter. There were issues with that rim diameter, and that's the same problem that Tom Drage had, and that's how I came to have this brass. Okay, that was not going to work in his revolver, but it does work in mine. And so he sent me the brass, a couple hundred pieces of it, in fact. And so I'm very thankful for that. We saw how the modifications of the Smith & Wesson Model 3 that were suggested by Major George Schofield were an improvement in many ways over the single action Army. The Army liked the round. They were really happy with the ballistic. It was a little lighter load, okay, a little bit easier for the troopers to manage. They just didn't like the fact that the single action Army revolver and the Model 3 were not equally compatible with each other. And ultimately, the Army went with the Colt, and the Schofield kind of fell out of favor with the Army, although they remained popular with private owners. All right, that's where we're going to kind of pull the plug today. Next time, come back and I'm going to prep the brass and get it all ready to go, and I'll take you through that process, even though I know some of you guys are probably well aware of what brass prep's all about. But we'll do that. Then we got to come up with a bullet that we can use. I want to develop a round that approximates the 45 ACP load of a 230 grain bullet at that 830, 850 feet per second, somewhere in there. Okay, and so it might have a little bit of load development somewhere along the line, but we'll definitely get some casting done and some loading done and some shooting done in subsequent issues of the series. I think we can hold it to maybe 4 parts. All right, that's going to do it for today. I hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it, but from the Viejo bench, for now, that's all she wrote.